Today I'm going to tell you all about one of my favourite fictional characters of recent years. His name is Joe Swallow. He's a detective in the Dublin Metropolitan Police in the 1880s. He's a man of science, reasoning and cunning. He's not particularly well connected, but his street smarts make him one of the best detectives the city has. And of chief interest to me, he lives above a pub. Welcome to Publin, a podcast about the culture, history and heritage of pubs at home and abroad. Detective Joe Swallow is the primary character in a series of 4 novels about murders and political intrigue set in 1880s Dublin. Swallow's family owned a pub in Kildare and attempted to send him to medical school, but his hard drinking at the time meant that he didn't complete his studies and instead joined the Dublin police force. As a single man, he roomed above M&M Grant's pub on Thomas Street, owned and operated by a one Maria Walsh, with whom Joe Swallow begins a relationship. A friend put me onto these novels about a year ago, and I've been making my way through them ever since. A great deal of the content of the novels is based in historical fact, and many of the people and buildings mentioned in the books are also real. From the description of Grant's pub on Thomas Street, we can extrapolate that the location of what was fictionally Grant's pub is actually now called the Magnet, also formerly Agnes Brown's. Conor Brady is the author of the Joe Swallow series. He's also a journalist and academic. Conor was editor of the Irish Times for 16 years and has written extensively about the history of Irish policing. He's got many other accolades to his name, but for today, we're mostly interested in him as the man who invented Joe Swallow and brought Victorian Dublin to life in such a vivid way. Fittingly, I sat down with Conor in the Magnet pub, where much of the book is set. It was early in the day, so we didn't share Swallow's favourite drink, a Tullamore Dew, but we did go in-depth on topics including recreating an older version of Dublin on the page, policing, and of course, pubs. A little word of warning that the audio is not as clear and crisp as I wanted it to be, and the pub was slightly busier than I had intended, but I think it's still very listenable. It's amazing what you can do with one click on a piece of noise-cancelling technology nowadays. So I think that's the cue to bring in the pub noise sound effects. Ooh, maybe a slightly quieter pub. Yeah, that's better. And now, on with the show.
Okay, so Conor, just before I started pressing play there, you told me you've never actually been in this pub before, or you have on one occasion. But so how did it come to be the setting, or partially the setting, for your 4-part detective novel?
Well, you're correct, John. I was actually here on one occasion as a young reporter many years ago. There had been a shooting in the Liberties, and I was sent out as a young reporter from the Irish Times to cover it. I don't remember much of the detail, but I did meet a detective from Kevin Street whom I knew, and I said, "What can you tell me?" And he said, "I can tell you nothing here." He said, "But if you want to pop down to the whatever the pub was called at the time, I can't remember the name of it," he said, "I'll see you there in 20 minutes." So we came down here, and he gave me what I needed to know. It was my introduction to it. But how did I pick it? I know the area very well. I've never lived here, but I have worked here quite a bit as a young reporter. Dublin was my beat, and I suppose I wanted a location for Swallow which would be central, which would be contiguous to the castle where he works, but also which would be the part of a busy, lively community. And I remember walking by one evening and just seeing this pub as it was, realising it suited my needs perfectly, because it was directly opposite St. Catherine's also, which gave it a lot of history. It was about 10 minutes walk from Dublin Castle. And of course, it had, because it's on a corner, I was able to create a back entrance. You know, the back entrance I think is long gone, but it was there in my imagination, and this is where Swallow's informants would come in to do it.
This is probably just to my right here, left directly behind
here, yeah. to go down towards Oliver Obama Street. And this was where Swallow's informants, Charlie Vanucci and guys like this, would come at night and tap at the back door to give him information.
Yes.
So it kind of it suited the job, as it were, and it suited the land.
So, as you said, thematically, it kind of worked with having St. Catherine's across the road, site of the execution of Wolfe Tone, and a lot of the book goes into our kind of nibbles at the butting of heads between an insurgent Irish republicanism, official Ireland in the sense of the DMP, and official Ireland in sorts of the civil service.
As a fellow historian, I don't correct you.
Okay.
Wolfe Tone wasn't executed over there.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Not water there.
Okay. You learned something in the news.
I did. So I suppose it opened kind of doors for stories to tell by having him lodging up above here. I've got a piece of information about the pub that I don't know if you'll be familiar with. Did you know that people with the surname Walsh actually lived in the pub in the 1880s?
I didn't know that.
Yes, I just found that out as a child. We got P. Walsh. It was the name. And in 1929, the pub became Walsh's.
So Maria Walsh was on home ground.
Yeah, so you got that accidentally right, I guess.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't it?
Interesting, yeah.
The publican's name was Dennis Daly.
Wow.
I think he had it from, I have it in my notes here. I have a timeline somewhere here.
Well, I can fill in another part.
Oh, yes.
Part of the jigsaw, because, as you know, Joe Swallow grew up in a public house in County Kildare, behind the Curragh, at the Biscom Madden's townhouse. And that was his family's home pub. They did quite well out of it because they're right behind the Curragh, so all the Tommies would come out and pay in, put their money on this. But in actual fact, Madden's townhouse in the early years of the 20th century, the late years of the 19th century, was actually owned by my grand aunt, and Mrs. Walsh. So it was known as Mother Walsh's, and she was Brady by birth, Walsh by marriage. She never had any children, and her marriage to her husband fell on rocky times fairly early. But I reckon it was a good place from which to have Joe Swallow come, because it was rural, and they were people who, I suppose, pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps, as a lot of Catholic family did at the time. And the licensed trade was one of the ways in which ambitious Catholic families could move forward.
Okay, that's interesting. Did you know the layout of the buildings here, or did you construct it in your head to suit the purposes of the narrative?
I knew the layouts. I knew there were 3 stories. And I reckoned that there were the pub faced onto 2 streets, so it probably had 2 different entrances, a slightly different clientele, and there was probably a select bar and the public bar, which would have been very common in public houses, as you know, at that time, and then, as was the custom at the time, the proprietor and his or her family would live in the good rooms upstairs. Probably some room for storage upstairs, but storage in the cellars as well. But the rooms above would have been the good rooms where Swallow and Maria lived. They have their dining room, they have their bedrooms, there's a kitchen up there where Carrie, the cook, does the meals for them eating. So it would have been fairly standard and fairly traditional. It's not living above the business.
Yeah, I think that was the case for the Palace Bar on Fleet Street, which gets 2 or 3 mentions over the course in the books. I think Willie Ahern, the proprietor there, I think he talks about what is now the Whiskey Palace, the bar on the first floor. He talks of that as the kitchen or the house. I didn't
know any of that.
Yeah, but I think his father for a time would have lived there.
Yeah,
Willie Senior.
Yeah,
I guess.
Swallow goes down to he's in and out of the palace a fair bit, which was very logical because one of his good contacts was Andrew Dunlop, the Irish Times reporter, who was a real life character.
Really?
Yeah. Wrote a very celebrated book called A Life in Irish Journalism. He's a Scotsman. But Swallow, and he becomes quite. There's a symbiotic relationship between G Division detective and Irish Times political reporter, and their politics are the same. They're both Carmelites, so he's in the palace quite a bit. As I was as a young reporter, I have to say, I was a not so young reporter in later years.
So, getting details like that, is that kind of that journalists would have met up with Gmail and policemen in certain pubs. Is that an invention of yours, or do you have kind of documentary proof that are anecdotal or from
yes. I mean, if you read the intelligence reports, you will find that very frequently the encounters were in pubs.
Okay.
And they had codes. So if I were a detective and you were an informant, you and I would agree that number one would be Walsh's of Tallis Street. Number two might be the Palace. So if I, as an informant, wanted to see you as a detective, I would slip a note into the letterbox in Exchange Court and maybe bring it into the counter, or give a boy a penny to bring it in, and it would say, you would have a code name. Say your code name might be Silver. You would give the number of the code would be number 1, and you say 7 p.m. So Silver 17. That means I'm Silver. I'm the foreman known as Silver. I'll see you and watch at 7 o'clock.
And number 3 was the Brazen Head, I believe.
That's Brazen Head. Although I think John Mallon used to drink in the Brazen Head. Mallon, of course, was again a real-life character, very celebrated head of the G Division. I have a feeling that they used the Brazen Head more for recreation rather than as a place to meet informants.
Okay.
I will put a correction on that. But
do you think then as well, just kind of extrapolating from that, they mightn't have been at work in the Brazen Head, that they could relax and have their drink? Would it have worked in the inverse with Charlie Vanucci and Seth Dennis? Have people live there? I'm sure they had policemen for knowledge.
Yeah, I'm sure they had their own watering holes as well.
Yeah. And just incidentally, on the gangs, the Vanucci Downs and Sesson gangs, what is the historical accuracy of them, or were there people like them, or
there were.
They exist?
I've changed the names because the names would be quite common names that one would encounter in inner Dublin. So I picked names of people who were not connected in any way with the criminal gang. There were these criminal gangs at the time. One of them was actually run by a madam of I put a model to Charlie Vanucci. They were a family of Italian background. They had come to Dublin as so many Neapolitan Italians did in the 19th century. And they already brought the ice cream industry and the fishing industry with them. Seth Downs, I've modelled on a real life character. That's not her name, obviously, but the Seth part is correct. The character by whom she's based was a woman who was a servant in a great house in Marion Square, and she was stealing silverware from the house, and she would store the silverware, spoons, small items like that, forks, little plates under her bed. But the lady of the house became suspicious and searched her room and asked Seth to come in with her while she searched the room. And she found silverware hidden away out of the bed. And Seth was asked what she thought of this. So she reached under the bed and took up a metal chamber pot with which she brained the lady of the house.
As you do.
And left her a permanently vegetative state.
So it's as it happens in the book.
That she became known as Piss Pot Sess. She was pronounced insane at her trial and was consigned to the mental asylum, which I think was in Portrane at the time. But she entered the days of the asylum anyway, but she was known to all on Sunday as Piss Pot Sess.
Would this have been a famous case, or again, would it have been from police reports that you would have gotten this information?
I believe I came across her in the report from a man who was the resident medical superintendent in Portland, and his name escapes me now, but he did write a book sometime in the 1980s about the history of mental hospitals in Dublin. And I do remember I got the book from my late colleague in the Irish Times, David Nolan. Dr. David Nolan was a great, apart from being a great journalist, great critic, great sense of the history of medicine.
That's interesting. I suppose next question was kind of about the world building. Dublin is an actual place that exists, but casting your mind back to, or trying to create the world of 1880s Dublin, did you have constant reference points in the way of maps, certain books that you would refer to, or Tom's directories, or stuff like that, just to kind of give yourself the lay of the land, to immerse yourself mentally in it as you're in the process of writing the fictional element?
Yes, I mean, as you know, John, there's loads of sources. The maps are in abundance. The city records are very good. The census records are very good. And the policing records are also very good. So in a sense, what I did was I kind of superimposed the policing maps and the policing records on top of the kind of the municipal city records, the city maps. For example, the Dublin Metropolitan Police was divided into a number of divisions, as they call it. There's A, B, C, right through to F. A was in Kevin Street, the Liberties. B was in Pierce Street, Central City there. C was north of the Store Street. D was the Bridewell. E was Donnybrook, Rathmines. F, the leafy suburbs of Dunleary and Blackrock. G was the division in the castle. Wasn't a geographic division; it was the designation given to the G division detectives. So I kind of superimposed that on the map, on the city. And the interesting thing about it is that up to very recent, the very same divisional boundaries existed and still do within Dublin city centre. The Guards A district, as it is now, Kevin Street and Kilmainham, is coterminous exactly with the old Dublin Metropolitan Police A division. B is the same. B was famous because the tallest men always went to the B. That was Pierce Street, what was then Brunswick Street. The reason the tallest men went to the B was when the monarch, or when the Lord Lieutenant, was moving around the city centre to important places, there was always a risk of assassination. Therefore, you surrounded them with tall men. So nobody under 6 feet got into the B division. And if you were over 6 feet or over, you were put into the B, and your job was to stand between the Lord Lieutenant or Queen Victoria and the assassin's bullet. But that still continues, and the Guards still send tallest men and women, I suppose,
That's incredible.
to Pierce Street.
And this is kind of getting away from the books, but I know you're a historian of Garda Síochána, as well as policing generally in Ireland. So it seems like that there was, in the transition between Dublin Metropolitan Police and Garda Síochána, that there were commonalities. Was there commonalities of personnel? Did people carry on in their roles but under a different hat?
Yeah, quite a few. Most of the G division men in 1921, 1922, most of them packed it in and left. They were given very generous retirement terms. They wouldn't have been particularly popular in the New Ireland.
Right.
So most of them left. Quite a few of them joined the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Quite a few of them went to Palestine, joined the Palestine Police. Some left and joined British police forces. A small few, stayed on the G division of the Dublin Metropolitan Garda, as it became, in 1925. I would say about a dozen men altogether. They formed the nucleus of the new special branch, as it was called, in Dublin Castle, when the Guards were amalgamated with the Metropolitan Police in 1925. But you had a distinctive cohort within the Guards from 1925 right up to the late 1980s. And that was the old inheritance of the old Metropolitan Police. The DMP, as it was called, they had their own rank. They had a special rank, Station Sergeant, which came between a sergeant and an inspector. So you had station sergeants in the Guards right up to the 1980s. It's gone now. The rank is gone at this stage. You also had... There are traces of the Dublin Metropolitan Police around still. You will still see the old metal police lamps outside Cavan Street, outside Kilmainham. Those are distinctively Metropolitan Police. And I always think it's one of the interesting things that characterises the true Dubliner from the non-Dubliner. Certainly, in my time as a young reporter going around the town, people would always talk to you about the police. Right down the country, talk about the Guards. All right, there was a shooting. The police are here. I sent for the police. Or if it was that football in the street, I'd get the police on you. Out the country.
The Guards.
You go to the Guards.
That's an interesting distinction.
Yeah.
I somehow intuitively know that, but I haven't thought about it. You know, it is the back of my head.
Yeah.
What do I refer to that?
Yeah.
In the course of writing the books or following it, let me give you an example. I see Dublin a little bit differently in terms of reading your books, because certain landmarks stand out and they're no longer what they are, they're what they were in my head. For example, Broadstone. I live up close enough to Broadstone, Great Ormond. So now I see what is now it's a bus terminal, or the old railway station there. I think I would have passed by that, I don't know how many times, without really paying much notice to it. But now I kind of look at it as kind of that's a gateway to
the west.
To the west.
The northwest, yeah.
I also think how handy would that have been to have that on my doorstep now. But are there elements of Dublin that you look at differently now, or has Dublin changed a bit in the course of writing your books?
Well, it probably has. It has changed a lot. I mean, I'm a country boy originally. I grew up in the Midlands of County Offaly. I came to Dublin when I was 12. But I learned about my Dublin really by walking around it. And in particular, once I became a young journalist, journalist every time, I was assigned to what they call the town beat for a long, long time. It meant that anything that happened in Dublin, in the city centre, you went out and you covered it in Hila, and you walked. So I would have walked out to fires, I would have walked out to crime scenes, I would have walked out to, bad traffic accidents, I would have walked to public meetings. So I got to know Dublin terribly well. And to me, that Dublin, which was 50 years ago, I was 22, 23, and I know 50 years older than that. So the Dublin that's in my head was the Dublin of 50 years ago. If I walk through, say, Francis Street or Cavan Street now, I mean, I see utterly changed. I mean, apartment blocks, concrete buildings, and it was a whole new ethnic diversity that wasn't here in those. So the Dublin has changed. I think it's probably changed more in the 50 years since I worked the beat as a young reporter than it had from Swallow's time up to the time that I went there. Yeah. The other thing that, of course, informed my understanding was that I left the Irish Times out for a few years, and I joined at 22. No, I didn't. I joined at 20, and I became disillusioned with it about 3 years later, and went back to college. I took a postgrad. I also took on the job as editor of the Galway Review, which was had a desk in a small room in Dublin Castle. So I worked in Dublin Castle for a year in the lower yard, which is where Swallow.
Ah, good.
So in those days, Dublin Castle had not been renovated. We hadn't yet joined the EEC, as it was called. Dublin Castle was in ruins. And as a young man, I would wander the corridors, I would wander the buildings. If to do that, you would go in and out of these old offices and rooms and cellars, which were basically as that been left vacant by the British. There were a few offices in operation. There was a revenue and some offices. The Chief Herald had an office in the Bedford Tower. The Dublin Metropolitan headquarters of the Guards was in the Holy Yard, and the special that most of the castle was in dereliction. So I wandered it. Met a lot of ghosts.
Right.
Got to know a lot of ghosts. Got to know where things happened. Got to know the relationship between the Exchange Court and the castle itself. And you could wander in and out of the estate of Rapids.
That's some access. So did you have in your mind's eye then particular rooms, as you're writing the book?
I did, of course, yes. Yeah. It was great. I remember I was only a year there. And I was actually an employee of the Garda representative bodies in that state. And they moved out fairly shortly to Marlborough Office Block in Phillipsburg. But in that year that I was there, I did terrific exploration. But I remember there was an elderly retired detective called Johnny McAvoy. And Johnny said to me, he said, "Where do you go when you go wandering around?" And I said, "I just wander here and there, Johnny." He said, "Do you ever get stopped? Do you ever get any people are asking where you go?" And I said, "Sometimes they do, yeah." He says, "What do you tell them?" I tell them about stuff in around. I tell you what to do. He said, "Look," he said, "Here, take this." And he gave me a big brown manila folder. He said, "Carry that with you at all times." Now, carrying a brown manila folder, he said, and you'll get anywhere. I think that you're on a very important mission.
It's the political equivalent of having a high-vis jacket on, I guess.
Yeah, and that got me in anywhere I wanted to go.
Walk with a good enough posture in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Anywhere. So the books, so they're detective novels first and foremost, but would you also describe them as historical fiction because they intersect so much with politics, especially, say, in the last two, when Parnell comes in as a character? He's part of the plot. He only features in one scene or so, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. But do you categorize it as such?
Yeah. Well, he plays his role increases, and the events that formed around his rise and fall also, like the forgeries and the Pigot suicide, Parnell Commission, the land war, the campaign for Home Rule, all of these were on Parnell. Now, I was saying earlier on, before we start the interview proper, that was an area I focused on when I was doing history in UCD. Really, that period of history, from the 1870s through to, I suppose, the early 1900s, was really the most important period of time in the formation of modern Ireland. Our history education tended to focus on 1916, the War of Independence, Civil War, all of which, of course, were hugely important. But the transition from a peasant, landless, uneducated society, which Ireland was post-famine, to the Ireland that we know now and would recognise now took place over those years. The ownership of the land moved from the hands of the landlords into the hands of the tenant farmers. Other things, realities which we now shape modern Ireland, were fought, like a GAA was formed, the Gaelic League was formed, the whole cultural revival of Ireland, the Abbey Theatre, and the revival of the Irish language, and things like the establishment of the county councils. This all happened in that period of time. So it's hugely important. And Swallow, our hero in the books, of course, is living through all of this. And he caught up with some of the contradictions of it, because he is a Roman Catholic by background, and therefore there are barriers to his investment so far as the establishment is concerned. Not likely to get promotion in the police. He has attempted to qualify himself as a medical doctor, but got thrown out from the medical school because of his legs. Now, had he managed to make that leap into the professional chances, you wouldn't have a Joe Swallow. But again, he's sort of emblematic, if you like, of the position in which the aspiring Catholic middle chances and the crossroad chances found themselves. And then you have the pushback and the resistance from the privileged Protestant Unionist cadres. For example, Doc Boyle, who is incompetent and hapless, but he's of the right faith.
Yeah.
He has a brother who is an archdeacon, and he's a Mason.
Yeah.
So therefore he's going to go far.
Yeah. on the topic of Swallow's background and the fact that he started or began to study medicine, was it always the case that you wanted him to be a man of science? Like, featuring heavily in the book is new technologies from the time, fingerprinting, new methods of post-mortem by Harry Lefebvre, and new methods of document keeping. I suppose with your hat on as a police historian, I assume you really wanted to include that.
Yeah,
that's what interests you.
It's very much part of the reality of the time. That the forensic science actually started to come into its own. And in the early Swallow book, the first Swallow book, fingerprints are yet unknown. Yeah. Well, Harry Lefebvre, whom we mentioned, is the medical examiner for Dublin. Well, the pathologist or the coroner, somewhere between those two roles. Harry Lefebvre tells a wandering Swallow that one day there will be a method in which people can be identified by the finger marks, by the ridges on their fingers. It seems a distant dream, but of course it was only a few years away. So, basic blood typing was beginning to be developed. Nothing like DNA that you have now, but they could tell A-type blood, B-type blood.
Narrowed down by a fifth or so.
Yeah, so you had all of these advances that were taking place. One of the things that actually gave the Dublin Metropolitan Police and the Royal Irish Constabulary great advantage was that two things. The Fenian Rising of 1867 frightened the living daylights into the authority, and the Phoenix Park murders in 1883. So here you had militant Irish nationalism being able to reach into the heart of the establishment, murder senior officials, mobilise not to the point where they could succeed, but certainly to the point where they've been threatening public order. The Westminster government realised that the policing of Ireland had to be supported in every way they could. So money was poured into the policing services. The RSC were given new modern equipment. Their training was improved hugely, and the same with the Dublin Metropolitan Police. They were given a lot of money to build up things like the Dublin Criminal Registry, which was basically the equivalent of PUS now, along the system which librarian views the Dewey Decimal System. It was regarded as a world leader at the time. Dublin got the most advanced pathology services. So Harry Lefebvre got his autopsy rooms, as they were called, and these were absolutely state-of-the-art. I mean, they had electric light, they had running water, they had steel tables. So this was an era in which, if you like, science and resources were put behind the policing effort. And so Swallow, although he's going a bit far to describe him as a man of science, but certainly in his friendship with Lefebvre, they were able to talk the same language.
Yes. Yeah. It's supposed to be a man of science. You can just trust in science, not necessarily have the powers to use it.
And Lefebvre was quite experienced. He's a medical doctor. He served with the British South African Police, which were also very advanced. British South African police were largely built by Irishmen, led by Irishmen who had been trained in the depot in the Phoenix, not in the XRIC. They were very advanced in terms of their methods, their equipment. So Harry Lefebvre comes back from South Africa with a lot of this knowledge that he's learned in the field, working with the VSAB.
I'm going to switch now back to pubs again, if you don't mind. As I was reading the books, I was taking note of any time I came across a pub. So several of them are, of course, known to me and known to people listening as well, because they still exist today. Yeah, it was like the Palace Bar, which was called Halls at the time, Morgue in Temple Oak, which is the fourth book. Yeah, and the Swanmore, I believe, the Brazen Head, of course, that comes up over and over again. Yeah. But there's several other pubs that I was going to ask, did they actually exist, or did you come up with them? So there's Curravins on the corner of Fishamble Street, Jack Feehan's, Capel Street. You might not have even thought about these.
Feehan's of Capel Street was, I think, for Slattery's now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, interesting.
Some of the other ones are fictional. The Dolphin, of course, was there at the theatre. The Dolphin is real. The other establishment, of course, which was not a pub but a hotel, was the Burlington. Well, my generation, I grew up with in Burlington Hotel, which was a Doyle Hotel in Donnybrook. But in Swallow's time, the Burlington was the elite place to eat in central Dublin. So yeah, I mean, the pubs, some of them are real, some of them are not. Many of them have got through a name changing. I suppose the role of the pub is very important in the narratives. As the role of the pub was very important in Dublin society, people's homes were generally poor, often unheated, uncomfortable. And the pub, with its warmth and its alcohol and its company, was very much so pleasant resort.
Yeah, it was a necessity rather than just a treat.
Yeah, and it was. I suppose it was the opium of the people, if you like, in a way. That, you know, in Hunt in Winter, Swallow is musing that he hates Saturdays, not because of Saturday, but because Saturday is the morning after Friday night, which was pay night. And all the pubs of Dublin were filled with fellas with nowhere to spend. So you've got fights, and you've got domestic incidents, and you've got stabbings, and you've got brawls. And then on Saturday morning, the courts are closed. So the cells in the police stations are overflowing.
Has anything changed in that regard? Certainly in the A&E, it's probably still the same case. So pubs are an important place, and some of the other businesses that you go into as well in the books. One that's recurring is the jewellers, the pawnbrokers on Capel Street. Yeah. Ephraim Goldberg, the character, and his daughter Catherine operate that. Was it important to get an element of Jewish Dublin into the books?
I think so, yes. That Capel Street was, of course, in the 18th century. Capel Street was the fashionable street, as Rutland Square was the fashionable, and the fashionable Dublin had not yet moved to the south side.
Right.
This is very well documented in a new book, the Dublin One City One book by Andrew Buse, The Coroner's Daughter, which is crime novel set in that period. But Capel Street was very much a fashionable street, fashionable for living and fashionable for shopping. It also had a strong Jewish community. It had its own synagogue. And I thought it would be a nice polarity to put this Jewish family, the Greenbergs, into Capel Street. They serve a number of purposes in the narrative. Catherine, there's this undefined frisson which continues between Swallow and Catherine is not younger than Swallow, but there's still the possibility of a romantic connection between them. But she feels that she needs to work with her father. Her mother is dead. She needs to keep the business going. And then also, of course, because it's a pawn shop as well, the crimes that Swallow is investigating very often lead into that direction, where quality goods appear. And Swallow then, in the Dark River, and he needs to get expert in cremation, and some precious stones and some rare coins. So he goes to Ephraim Greenberg, elderly, the proprietor of the shop. So I kind of wove the Jewish thing in as sort of to give a little bit of, just a bit more exotic, I suppose.
Yeah. So I lived on Lombard Street West a few years ago, which is kind of in the heart of Jewish Dublin at one point. So nearly everybody, well, a lot of people that lived on that road were Jewish and used to be tillers at the end of the road. But I guess there was kind of various different types. If, as I say, there's a synagogue on Capel Street, so that was another corner. Where people
It's I suppose when you ask me, is this history apart from being side out? I would like to think that in the broad sweep, it's reflective of social history and political history. I don't think there are any egregious departures from the historical reality or the sociological reality. Obviously, story itself, though, the characters are real, but the stories largely fiction.
So they exist within larger unfolding stories that are real, I guess. More of a personal question, but do you have a favourite pub in Dublin or elsewhere, anywhere in the world or in the country, or somewhere that you don't have to be a regular there, but maybe fond memories of? So what would you consider to be a good pub?
I have a few kind of. Actually, I live in the west of Ireland now. I live outside Galway, so I kind of I wouldn't be a great frequenter of pubs, but Morns of the Weir in Kilcolgan in Galway is a wonderful place for good drinks and excellent seafood as well. Dublin, I suppose, I tend to look to the part of Dublin in which I lived for most of my life, which was the Anick and Leary area, and I would say that Goggins and Mugstown was always in it, but and the Fitzcatholics of that's too cynical and legally another book. But the kind of funds that we're dealing with that people are comfortable in now, it don't bear much relationship to the bit of features in the Swallow. Basically, functional drinking cases. Now, I've often wondered, and I actually stretching reality too far when I have Swallow going into certain pubs in Dublin and having a steak and kidney pie. I don't know what did they
that's what I do. I wondered,
did they do that? I don't know.
Was the food better then than it is now?
I don't know. When I was a reporter in the returns, our pubs around Fleet Street were you had the Perry in the corner of Fleet Street and Westmoreland Street. You had Doyle's on the corner with Pierce Street. You had the Fleet. I don't think any of them actually served food. If they did, it was just basically sandwiches, you didn't like cheese and a bit of ham thrown between two slices of white bread.
They wouldn't have had the facilities to.
But the concept of the gastropub, as they call it, that certainly wasn't there at all.
Your description of this pub that we sit in now, it seems like it was a more upmarket kind of place. And some Guinness's powers and local shopkeepers all drank here, which would indicate that it was a nice place, but it was also probably a safe place, which is Maria Walsh, the lady's motivation initially for having Joe Swallow here. Would you like to have had a drink here, do you reckon, from your own description?
I think it would have been, yes. I mean, you see, she had improved the premise. It came down in the maternal line. She inherited it from her mother, I think, and in turn from her grandmother. Well, that was a very common thing, I thought, in Ireland. The folks coming down in the maternal line. Because again, ownership of a pub was one of the few ways in which a woman could actually make away in business. So she invested in the renovation of what was called, I suppose called M&M Watch. So she invested quite a lot in it. She put his running water, toilets at the back and things like that. She put electric light into one of the bars, but she left the other one with gas, just in case she fully trusted the women. And she has the pub in two parts. There's a public bar, which is a little bit maybe a bit more rough and ready, and then she has the more select bar. She doesn't serve, of course. She doesn't pull pint. She dresses herself elegantly in the evening. She goes down. She makes her presence felt. She moves from table to table. The bar is run by Dan, the head man. One or two of his curates, perhaps the attendant. And she is conscious, if you like, of the fact that it's a select house, and she wants to keep it as a select house. And therefore, Swallow's presence is a little bit of insurance and that, even though he shouldn't be living on the premises, it's against police regulations. Everybody knows he's a policeman. But his presence in the bar is enough to deter the possibility of the wrong element hanging around too much. And once or twice, where there is trouble, Swallow moves in, and the troublemaker finds himself on his backside out on the street. So there's a kind of there's a synergy there. She also, of course, she wants Swallow to come into the business with her. She wants him to give up his policing work.
That's the great personal friction and all of that.
And he's conflicted because although he works extraordinarily hard as a detective, and the work is dangerous and challenging, it gives him a freedom that he doesn't want to sit in the sitting room in Thomas Street.
You always get that sense that you completely miss the hunting down of people.
Yeah, so as you said, that's the continuing stress between the two of them. I don't know how it resolves. There's another fifth book somewhere in there.
No,
I've yet to put language around it here first.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I don't quite know. You see, he's also, at the end of the last book, he's reached the rank of detective inspector. And the big cut-off point would have been with his inspector or superintendent. Will he make it superintendent? Malin wants him to go to superintendent. Malin, of course, is up to old days. He's a son of a Catholic farmer in County Armagh. He got to assistant commissioner. Absolutely unheard of for a Roman Catholic to get there. So you have to see how far Swallow goes and what effect that has on his relationship with Maria. Somebody suggested to me that one should probably take a leap forward, have him retire, and have their son, who was an infant at this stage, suddenly emerge as a young detective in the new force.
Yes, yeah,
in the 1920s. So
I was half expecting that as a leap forward at the end of the fourth book. That was, where my mind was going with it. I didn't kind of want to give too much away in the interviews for people who want to read it, but it's about the unfolding of the crime. But my question was going to be, where would Swallow be in 1916 to 22? He would have been retired, presumably, or
he would have already. He could well have been dead by then, because life expectancy was as good then as it is now.
He eased off the drink, but
yeah, if he did that a little bit, it would. But he would have been gone by the time Collins' hit squads began to assassinate G-men, and he would have been well gone in 1916.
I was there.
So if I could stretch it, I might get the young Swallow, the fledgling, to come in.
Son of Swallow.
It was interesting how I got the name. I was back to all the lists of the G Division at the time, and it was very interesting. There was about 80 men in G Division, and I realised that there was a robin, there's crow, there was pigeon, there was bird, there was half a dozen synonyms for birds, What is it? Yes, we invented another bird. Have a new bird, so I picked a swallow.
That's a good way to go about it rather than just in the phone book, closing your eyes and picking around it. So I've one final question. It's not the most earth-shattering question for you, but it was just something that that tickled my interest. Was this will be a short answer, I'm sure, but why didn't Swallow enjoy Guinness's porter during the day, and you'd only have a whiskey, a Tullamore Dew, but he wouldn't have a porter during the day? Was it that bored of experience that he wouldn't do that?
I'll tell you the background to that. I remember covering by-elections around the country, and I just had a couple of pints, and you're standing there going from one leg to the other, waiting, speaking your pint of face, whether there was a Jackson doing it. So if I was on the move, working, I was on the road. I didn't drink much, but if I did drink, I'd maybe have a gin and tonic in a little wistful one. And so I kind of transferred that to Swallow. Tullamore Dew, that's just a nod to the hometown. I grew up with Tullamore, and although funny enough, he's not the only detective that drinks Tullamore Dew. You know the Swedish guy.
The girl with the dragon tattoo.
The hero there, the woman, she drinks Tullamore Dew.
Oh.
She drinks it neat. I just can't think of the name of the guy with the
Tigars.
Exactly, Tigars. So he has her drink Tullamore Dew neat.
Yeah.
Which is fair enough, okay.
In good company. So that's a lesson to any aspiring journalists listening, is don't drink pints when you're on the beach, I guess.
The tips for survival.
Yeah. Okay, well, Conor Brady, thank you so much for sharing your insights, and thanks for the books as well. I really enjoyed reading them. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners might pick them up now. And I usually await 50 books.
Well, thanks, John, for the opportunity. I really enjoyed the conversation. And thanks for introducing me here. I'm just waiting for Swallow to walk in the door, or Maria to come downstairs to invite me up for lunch. I won't wait too long.
Maybe a Tullamore Dew.
Thanks again.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to my interview with Conor Brady, author of the Joe Swallow historical fiction mystery crime novels. You can find the novels in just about every bookshop in Dublin, online, and in your local library. Thanks a million to Conor for taking the time to meet with me and for a very pleasant chat. I'd also like to thank Dave Whelan for his technical assistance on getting the audio cleaned up, and thanks very much to the team from the Magnet Pub on Thomas Street for being so accommodating. They seemed very interested to know that the pub was now part of Irish literary history. If you'd like to send me a message, you can reach me, John, via publin.ie@gmail.com. That's it for this week, and all that's left to say is thanks again and sláinte.